Our next presenter is Jody Utter. Jody is a fellow of the International Institute for Conservation and the American Institute for Conservation. She serves as the education chair for the book and paper group for AIC and is also on the AIC nominating committee. She is a member of the Western Association for Art Conservation, the Midwest Regional Conservation Guild, and the American Society of Trace Evidence Examiners. Please welcome Jody Utter.
Thank you. Hello. How's everyone? Are we still awake after lunch? That's good. I just got some really great news from home. Our yard won the most beautiful in our neighborhood. Thank you. Thank you. I'm thrilled. Okay, anyway. That's right, why I'm here. Okay. So first of all, I want to say that I'm very excited to be here and to have this opportunity to really focus on an area of research that up to this time I just didn't have time to do that. And this opportunity really gave me the focus to look at a piece from the Gilcrease collection that has been on my agenda for at least 5 years. So thank you so much for inviting me to participate here. Okay, here we go. And just to let you know, this thing's poking me. I am nervous for a page, and then I forget about it, and everything's fine. So we're all going to get through this together. So here we go. Okay. Charles Russell, as most of you know, was a prolific artist. I take my title from the idea that Russell was in constant motion, either making art or telling a story, and most often both. He painted in oil and watercolor, sculpted in wax, bronze, and clay, and he drew numerous sketches, producing thousands of finished pieces and even more preliminary works. A popular myth surrounding Russell was that he was entirely self-taught, thereby completely free from formal instruction and operating using his raw talent alone. This romantic notion doesn't entirely ring true. He actively sought out other artists as friends and mentors. He made a point to visit art galleries and museums and to view other artists' work, and he kept an extensive personal library. I believe he learned much about technique, which is what I'm going to talk about today, from looking at artwork and from talking to other artists and from reading instructional manuals that were prolific at the time. From my study of Russell's watercolor paintings, published in 2015 in the book Charles M. Russell Watercolors, 1887 to 1926, I found evidence that Russell was using traditional techniques in his paintings alongside unconventional methods. So it seemed logical to me that he would do the same thing with his drawings. This study will examine if Russell used conventional drawing techniques when creating his preliminary drawings. We will look at examples from his drawing techniques and from his drawing materials. And finally, we will briefly explore Russell's sketches, ideas, and timeline for his first mural. And I want to stress that for his first mural, entitled Lewis and Clark Meeting Indians at Ross's Hole. You may recognize this photo. It's from the Gilcrease collection. For this project, 2 books were studied, both spanning 1911 to 1912, an important time period in Russell's artistic life when he was receiving critical acclaim and national attention. The book on the left is from the Gilcrease Museum's archive collection, and the book on the right, the Amon Carter Museum of American Art. I have a deep appreciation for artist sketchbooks. They serve as a visual form of diary, where the artist can explore ideas and work out problems, as well as make the occasional notes. Typically unencumbered with the thought of others seeing this work, sketchbooks are freer, often revealing information about an artist's creative process. Being able to study and compare these two objects was a rare and unique opportunity. The story they tell is quite illuminating. And this is, I'm going to show you this slide because the cover is too boring. So this is the first page of the Carter sketchbook. So let's talk about the Gilcrease object first. It is a leather-bound, pocket-sized book measuring 5.5 inches by 2 3/4. It was a giveaway offered to patrons by a local Great Falls clothing company to advertise their store. It contained a 1911 calendar, as well as numerous helpful tidbits about a wide variety of subjects. This page that I'm going to show you just covers a few of them. So, in case you wanted to know how long it was going to take to digest lunch, we can look that up. So, it's eggs, lamb, milk. You might want to know that. I don't know. It also covers the melting point and boiling points of lead and glass. And my favorite is the wedding anniversary presents. So on your first anniversary, you're supposed to get cotton, apparently, and your 75th, diamond. You're welcome. Okay. Yes. Anyway, this book also contained space for keeping accounts, and importantly for us today, numerous blank pages printed with a grid pattern that Russell used as a combination sketchbook and address book. And here we have an example of one of those pages. So, in this particular image, what we have is a number of sketches, and we have some notations about contact information. The page on the right has at least 3 different sketches in varying orientations, and on the left, at least 2 different sketches. The contacts, E. Hugh and Harry Haywood, are written squarely over a patch of semi-erased sketches. This small notebook, and I want to just give you a visual. This is the size, right here. That is tiny. When they say pocket-sized book, they're not kidding, right? This is like what you get from Hallmark, right? The pocket-sized calendar. Less formal than a sketchbook, it seemed to have served as a place to jot down ideas and make preliminary sketches. The printed grid lines on the page helped when keeping the drawings in proportion. Just so you can see it a little bit better. And obviously, Russell started with the horse, because the head is in the gutter. But it's a beautiful horse. Okay. So, this notebook also contained 29 pages of names, phone numbers and addresses, contacts in St. Louis, St. Paul, Chicago, and New York City. All places Russell went or had shows in 1911 and 1912. The contacts in this book read more like a who's who in Western art. This set of pages features Philip Goodwin, American painter and illustrator who specialized in depictions of wildlife and the American West. He was a very good friend of Russell. Next, on the same page, we have Ed Barine, a well-known Western artist, and it lists his address for his studio in New York City. Some of the other well-known artists listed in this book are the painters Oscar Burninghouse, William Glackens, who he called Jim, sculptor Alexander Proctor, portrait painter William Krigoff, and Western illustrator and painter William Carey. I stress the names of the artists in Russell's book in part to chip away at the notion that Russell learned all his techniques in isolation. That just doesn't make sense. The conventional drawing techniques I will show you have been used for centuries. Russell didn't intuit them or make them up himself. Rather, one of his friends demonstrated the concept, or he read about it in one of the many artist manuals prolific at the time. This revelation doesn't take away from Russell's work at all. Instead, it shows how incredibly adaptive he was. Also listed in this book of contacts was a man named Jesse Burt. He was the assistant curator at the Field Museum in Chicago. He oversaw the model-making department, something Russell could easily identify with, as we know he made vignettes himself. The interesting thing about its inclusion is that Bert died February 7th, 1911. Russell would not have put his name in this book if he knew he was dead. Meaning, what's significant about that is it helps us date this book. Obviously, because it has a 1911 calendar in it, it's not going to happen before that time, but because this man's death was in February, it just helps us place the use of this book into very firmly in early 1911, and I suspect into 1912. You may say, I don't care, but for art historians, that can be useful information. Okay, so the Gilchrist book, remember, this tiny, included 61 pages of drawings, including this self-portrait. The area where we would expect to see the head is actually a sketch of the New York Harbor. So it has a ship, it has the skyline, and it has the Statue of Liberty. What's interesting about the below the shoulders is that it's in the typical guise of the Russell stance, and Byron covered this beautifully, which is, like legs apart, and, that the one thumb hitched into the sash, and then the cigarette. And I've got two other examples to show you from about basically the same time. So this New Year's card from 1916, and this sculpture from 1915. And it's like, that's him. So let's talk about some technique, shall we? Russell is using a ruler. Here we can see that in these two drawings, and I will point it out so you can see it too. In the top drawing, we have an individual who's riding a horse, and he's got a staff right here. This is parallel to it. So what the ruled line is doing for this drawing is it's helping Russell keep the correct orientation for the body and the horse, so they're all going in the right direction. In the drawing below, we have another ruled line in the neck of the horse, and it's the same thing. It's so the entire drawing of that horse, the horse's neck, will stay in the right orientation. We have another example. This is a writer who is hunting buffalo. The horse is running at an oblique angle to the buffalo, and what the line does is help keep the horse in alignment as Russell draws it, maintaining proportion. Now, I mentioned earlier that that the book had pages that had a grid pattern printed on it. That helped with keeping proportion. And if we look closely at this drawing, we can see in this instance that the drawings of the horses were done first. So we drew the horses first, the figures second. And he used little tick marks to help him keep track of where the feet and the head should be. And he's marking the chin for where the head should start. And I believe that the figure on the left he did last, because that's why the head is in the gutter. So it doesn't quite fit. So, okay, he does it again. We have another example where he's using the grid lines on the page, which it may be a little hard to see, but I think you can actually. Oops, sorry. So we've got the grid pattern, right? And we've got these marks where he's marking the base of the head. And he's doing that just so the proportion of the head will remain correct. We see it again in this drawing of a buffalo. He's using this mark to mark the brow, where the brow of the buffalo should start. So right here, there's the eye. And he's using this line at the bottom of the chin for the buffalo to draw the correct proportion in the buffalo head. We see it again in this portrait. we've got a line at the top of the head, the brow, and the mouth. This is not a new idea. Leonardo da Vinci also did the same thing. These are not new concepts. This is a very traditional way of drawing the human form, the human body, and the human face. This is from the 15th century. Now, dynamic composition. Russell is an expert at this. Let's look first at the bottom below. Okay, so we have a horse riding full gallop with a rider who's trying to hunt buffalo, and it's headed right for us. And what Russell does, to increase the drama of this scene, he makes a very slight change. He erases where he originally put the head and shoulders and moves it down. And what that does is it increases the physical intensity of that figure, which then increases the intensity of the composition. This is the top portion. We see this horse galloping straight at us. This is called increasing the intensity of an image. Russell does this over and over and over again. He is a master at upping that drama, and this is just a small piece of it. So, the eraser. What's interesting about this to me is that throughout this little notebook, Russell's using eraser like crazy. He's erasing, he's starting over, he's erasing, and he's starting over, he's drawing things, and then he's erasing it, and then he's putting his contact information over his drawings. It's like he has no emotional attachment to any of these sketches. This book to him seems to me to be a place to catch his ideas until he can develop them further. On a larger scale. I've studied his watercolors, which means I've studied his underdrawings that started those watercolors, and how you make an underdrawing for a watercolor is you typically use a pencil. And Russell, does not use an eraser in those. It seemed to me that really where he's using the eraser the most is in these very preliminary drawings. And I've circled the areas of erasure, but I'm sure you can see them just sitting where you are. And this is a paint box from his studio collection. And what do we see? 4 erasers. Isn't that amazing? 4 different types of erasers, all extremely well used. These are his pencils. And these are the pencils that are also from his studio collection in Great Falls, Montana. The first pencil was a stenographic pencil. Now, for those of you who don't know what a stenographer is, we didn't used to have computers. There used to be typically a lady who would be writing notes as somebody was dictating or something was going on. And so that person who was making notes needed to be able to do that very quickly. And so this particular pencil, billed as a stenographer's pencil, has 2 leads on it. So you can sharpen both ends. So if you break a lead, you just flip it over and you're good to go. You can keep going. It was also marketed to artists because the flow of the graphite was very easy across the page. It was very dark lead, and it was a thin barrel, so it was easy to hold. The next two pencils were made by the American Pencil Company, the Velvet and the Venus. They have such a nice ring to them. And the Venus pencil was marketed to architects and to artists specifically. It was really well known for, like I said, its lead softness. Now, you may or may not know this. I know this because this is my field. But pencils come in very varying hardnesses. So it can be very hard and very light lead to very soft and very dark lead and smudges very easily. So what we have here, the Venus pencil, is a 6H, which means it's very hard and makes a very light line. And the velvet is a number 2, so it's somewhere in the middle. And then we have the Dixon pencil, which you can buy today. They're fairly ubiquitous and utilitarian. So let's talk about the Carter sketchbook, which is not better, it's just different. So it's an artist quality sketchbook. It belongs to the Carter Museum. It also dates from 1911 to 1912. It contains 50 drawings. Of the 50, 5 have applied watercolor, and 45 of the remaining sketches, 38 are directly related to the Montana State House mural project. This particular sketchbook was sold at the time in various artist catalogs. This happened to be one by George Rowney. George Rowney is actually, the company is still around today, but it contained Whatman watercolor paper or drawing paper. It had 2 rings for a binding and a hard cover. So what that would allow you to do is to fold over the cover entirely. It would give you support, so you could just hold the sketchbook with one hand, and it's this size. It's 5 by 7 inches. And you could easily hold it and draw. You could use it outside, you could use it inside, but it was small, so you could carry it with you. So this is one of the 45 drawings in the sketchbook. It's of a deer, and what Russell is doing, oh gosh, you can see my, you didn't see that, okay. What you can see happening is Russell using circles in the body of the deer to give it depth and form, and to give it that 3-dimensional appearance, which is there. Now, this is one of the 5 watercolors in the sketchbook, and you can still see, oh, darn it, thank you. I'm just hitting it so hard. Okay, so this is one of the watercolors, and you can still see how he's using the circles to give depth to that animal. Okay, now we're on to this guy. So, this is one of the drawings associated with the Montana Mural Project. It's obviously a figure, and what you may or may not notice is that there are little marks along the length of the body at very regular intervals. A very standard form of measurement for the human body is the human head. And the human body is considered to be 7.5 heads tall, essentially, give or take. This particular drawing is 7 heads tall. Using a grid pattern is also a very sort of traditional method of taking a drawing and resizing it or copying it. It's especially useful for things like a mural. So if you're small, and then you can easily make that larger as you draw it bigger when you're using a grid. Russell used a ruler and a hard leaded pencil to first draw the grid line over the drawing, and then went back over it with ink and by hand. I don't see too many examples of him using this technique, and so it feels to me that he didn't feel very comfortable with this particular method, but it's instructive and interesting. The grid technique has been used since Egyptian times and is still currently used to the present day. This is a self-portrait by Chuck Close. So, Catherine Kramer, the archivist at the C.M. Russell Museum, day before yesterday, sent me this image. For the most part, my talk is about the 2 sketchbooks, but this was just too good to go by, so I had to show it to you today. I'm talking about drawing techniques, conventional drawing techniques that Russell is using. This is the most picture-perfect example I have ever seen of one-point perspective. Now, if you know anything about perspective, this is the Webster Dictionary definition. I'll just read it to you. One-point perspective, a mathematical system for representing 3-dimensional objects on a 2-dimensional surface by using lines that intersect from one point to a vanishing point. So let's break this down. Okay, here's our horizon line. That's our vanishing point. So, in one-point perspective, everything pivots off of this point. So, we have this diagonal, and everything back here is scaled smaller, everything out here is scaled exponentially bigger. What this does is it fools the eye into believing that there's depth in this two-dimensional surface. This is a practice that has been used for centuries. And Russell's using it here in his sketchbook. Notebook, I should say. This big, remember? And he's using it beautifully here. So when you're using, this is two-point perspective because you have two vanishing points, which is not important to this discussion. But everything is going to be within these diagonals. Everything is scaled exponentially to fit within that, within those diagonals. Okay. That was really close to math. I won't talk about that right now. Okay, we're done with that for right now. We'll revisit it in a minute, but okay. As I mentioned earlier, Russell in 1911 and 1912 was receiving attention and praise for his work. He was showing in New York, Indianapolis, and Chicago, and he was receiving commissions for illustrations and paintings. It's informative to look at a timeline to get a glimpse into his life during these 2 years, especially his busy travel schedule and how it related to his exhibitions and his first mural commission. In 1911, on April 12th, he had a major one-man show at the Folsom Gallery in New York City. The title of the exhibition was The West That Has Passed. It contained 13 oils, 12 watercolors, and 6 bronzes. He then goes on vacation, which he does a lot. He then went on vacation, coming back to Montana in May, where he's informed that he's been awarded the commission for this Montana State mural. This is a big deal. For one thing, it's enormous. It's 12 by 25 feet. So he's told that he gets the mural. Then he starts working on ideas for the subject of the mural. So in November, he meets with the state officials again, and he shows them his ideas for the murals. They don't like either of those ideas. So they tell him that what he'll be doing is doing the subject of Lewis and Clark meeting the Indians, the Flathead Indians at Ross's Hole. And so that will be the subject matter. He then goes home and starts making plans immediately to raise the roof of his studio because the canvas wouldn't fit into his existing studio. In 1912, he writes a letter to his good friend, Philip Goodwin, telling him of the commission, and he includes a small painted version of his idea for the mural. In March, he has another show in New York City at the Folsom Gallery. He then goes on vacation again. He comes back to Montana in April, and the governor is getting a little antsy at this point. So the governor travels to Russell's studio in Great Falls to check on his progress. Guess what? No progress. How it's written in the literature is very little progress has been made, which AKA means really nothing's happened. So the governor is visibly upset about this, and because the press covers everything that's Russell, guess what made the newspapers? So this is April 8th. This headline ran, "Wants Russell to start on his work." So the next day's paper, his friends respond with, "Russell will get it done." Oh my God. So it's like this big drama fest that's playing out in the press. Anyway, thankfully, Russell starts the mural in May and goes to Ross's Hole, makes sketches. He essentially paints and sketches from May and June, and then he's done, which just blows me away. I just want to review. Okay, the mural is 12 feet by 25 feet, and he paints it in 2 months. It takes a week to dry, for God's sakes. Anyway. So, this is the letter I referred to that he wrote to Philip Goodwin, dated January 26, 1912. We're going back in time a little bit. So he writes to Philip Goodwin, and he says to him, I got that job at the Capitol, and as the picture is only 25 feet long and 12 wide, it got me thinking some. The subject is to be Lewis and Clark meeting the Flatheads. This is some jump for me, and I am liable to have to call for help and send for all my New York friends and put them to work. Besides being absolutely charming, this letter shows a rendition of the mural Russell has been contracted to paint that isn't quite like the finished piece. This is significant in letting us know that Russell doesn't have the subject matter down yet, and that he actually won't start on the mural for another several months. Oops, sorry. This is a picture of Ross's Hole today, just to give you an idea of what it looks like. It's absolutely beautiful. So here we have the finished mural next to the image that we had in the Goodwin letter. And what's significant about it, to me, is that there are some very essential changes that have taken place. So in the finished piece, we have all the action is right here. In the letter, it's back here. The major players, all the horsemen are pointed away from the audience. In the commission, in this final piece, it's headed right at you. So the horses are basically screeching to a halt from a gallop and turning just before they run into you. He's also moved the Indian village. So we had a teepee village right here, and now he's moved it way back here in the background. The angle that he's painted this mural at is very steep. So what that does, with our two-point perspective, is it creates greater depth. So it feels like this painting goes on forever. So we're going to look at a detail from this mural. As I mentioned before, the Carter sketchbook has 38 sketches for this mural, and here are some of them. For this figure alone, we've got this drawing, his hands, this drawing, and then this is the blanket over his saddle. So if we look at this portion of the mural, this is the portion that actually includes Lewis and Clark. I have this drawing, this one, this figure, and then Lewis and Clark. There you go. And finally, we have the ram's head next to the signature, which could possibly be taken from this sketch from the Gilcrease notebook. So let's just look at this painting sort of with what we've learned from our perspective. We've got the horizon lines, and we've got our vanishing points. This is a tour de force. I don't know if you've ever seen this piece. It is absolutely beautiful. I saw it for the first time, I don't know, 8 years ago. And the thing that struck me about it is that it felt like I was looking at a painting under a microscope. I walked up to it, and it looks like a watercolor. It's fairly thinly painted, which would make sense if you needed to dry quickly. It needs to be thinly painted. But it's done with such confidence. It was really quite breathtaking. If you ever have a chance to go see it, I would encourage you to do so. Okay. Russell clearly did not work in isolation. He had numerous friends that were accomplished artists, many of which are listed in the Gilcrease notebook. He would have most certainly discussed technique and exchanged ideas with them. The types of techniques he uses in his drawings are well-established historic drawing techniques that any professional artist would be skilled in. Either these friends or others would have easily shared with him these types of conventions, or he could have picked them up in a manual. In either case, Russell was a driven and curious artist, always wanting to improve and to learn how to do things better. It is inconceivable to me that he didn't share ideas with some of his friends, and I will list them from left to right and top to bottom. Ed Boreen, Frank Tenney Johnson, Bill Krigoff, Joe Shirley, Percy Rabin, Robert Atkin, William Carey, Philip Goodwin, Alexander Proctor, Oscar Burninghouse, and William Glackens. Here's the mural in situ. What's truly amazing about this mural is that it started out with these small studies in every form and guise possible. So from 5 by 7 inches to 25 by 12 feet. And what made it all possible was Russell's expert drawing skill of being able to draw it out piece by piece. Now, I'm not saying that he didn't sketch on the canvas before he painted it. But before he got to that point, he was making these portraits and these sketches of all the figures and animals that occupy that mural. So, in conclusion, when people watched Russell work, they often remarked on how he was in constant motion, drawing, painting, and telling stories. This type of energy is conveyed by Russell's dynamic compositions, visible in his preliminary sketches and finished works. Russell was absolutely focused on communicating what he saw as he saw it, crafting it in an energetic, engaging story for his viewers. The consummate storyteller, even when just making notes for himself. His relentless desire to get things right and tell a story in the most concentrated and dynamic way possible is evident in his output of numerous sketches and the very subtle corrections that can be seen within those drawings to increase the energy and intensity of the composition. Repeatedly, we see examples of Russell's using conventional drawing methods to maintain proportion, orientation, scale, and perspective. Not one to follow any rule that didn't work for him. The drawing methods he employed, he did with great skill. Russell applied the rules of proportions to draw the human face, as well as when drawing the head of a buffalo or the head of a horse. By 1911 and 1912, the skilled draftsman drew his subjects with weight and depth. They occupied space, they conveyed feeling, and they told a story. And finally, Russell most certainly picked up techniques shared by his artist friends, as they too utilized many of the same conventional drawing techniques. Thank you for your attention today.